Er zijn 3 dingen in het leven van een kunstenaar. Ten eerste, te kunnen werken. Ten tweede, goed te kunnen werken. En ten derde, de grootst mogelijke weerklank bij zijn publiek te vinden.
Who's afraid of art? Tyrants and wannabe tyrants, so it seems.
Artist Alexandra Skochelenko has been sentenced to 7 years in prison by St. Petersburg's invasion, spreading false information, disinformation.
With autocracy growing, with tyrants on the roll, Balie brings together over 40 international artists, writers and thinkers during Forum on European Culture. We celebrate the subversive power of art and literature and curate works of opposition that preserve the histories autocrats want to erase and imagine the futures they fear.
So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Art against the tyrants. Not for the faint-hearted.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming here to the Balie this glorious Saturday afternoon. Art against the tyrants, you can see it. We started a bit late actually today because there was still a discussion about the history of Serbian film, and that was so heated and so anti-tyrannical that it took a little longer. But welcome and thank you for your patience. And I think over the last couple of days we've been talking about extraordinary individuals who challenge dominant narratives of these tyrants that we know full well now, the Putins, the Netanyahus, the Xis of this world. Oligarchs, autocrats, tyrants, convicted criminals, unconvicted criminals, seizing power without accountability. And I think if they capitalize on one thing, well, it might be chaos on the one hand, it might be cash on the other, but if they capitalize on something, it's the power of a single story. The ability that autocrats can get away with telling a one-dimensional story and that people follow them with that story. And I think if this forum is about anything, it's about challenging that. So we find stories and challenge these one-dimensional images. And Anne Applebaum, a couple of days ago, opened the forum on European culture, who wrote an excellent book about the dictators who run this world. And actually, what she wrote about, what's most frightening about her book, is how well organized these people are, and how well they connect each other's cash flows, how well they know each other, how they set up forums just like this one, find rooms to hang out and to well, probably drink better wine than we do. And to find a response to that dictatorial system is actually quite difficult. It's overwhelming, it's frightening. Anne Applebaum obviously didn't have all the answers, but she did mention at some point in her book one name, and that name is Bektour Iskender. And I was very happy to come across that name because I knew that name. A Kyrgyzstan journalist who I know from his work at Kloop, doing cross-border journalism, big investigations with small teams, very young journalist that he trains himself, well-versed in the art of storytelling, well-versed in the art of the digital sphere, well-versed indeed in the art against the tyrants. And I love the stories that he tells. Some have a lot of theatrical flair, but they always speak truth to power. And I think today we're going to have a discussion with Bektour, with Paul Radu. We also have a surprise for you. But we're going to discuss what it is to speak truth to power when the truth itself is at stake. And how do you fight corruption when corruption itself is the dominant political business model? How can we become as organized as the autocrats we faced today? And even if we know the truth, how do we make sure the truth actually matters? So this is a discussion that's relevant all across the board, in the Middle East, in Europe, in our very own city of Amsterdam. But we'll focus around the geographies of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. I can't say I know the region too well. I have been there, I've eaten the food, I've loved the people, but what I can say is that the country where we are right now typically sees this region still as just lines on a map, sometimes even as a region for personal or political gain. And even today we don't know that this is a territory with humans, with history, with story, with agency. And even today we also don't realize how important this region is to the power position of Putin and Xi. The map that was once a Silk Road is now a highway for arms, for cash and corruption. And mapping these new roads is done by the gentleman we're going to meet today. So we'll talk with Bektour, we'll talk to Paul, and we hopefully also talk with you. I'm looking forward to that. But first of all, I would really love you if you would help me in welcoming Bektour Iskender when I give him the floor, with a warm round of applause.
Thanks, everyone. Should I get a clicker case?
Yeah, I'm looking for one right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to see everybody. I'm going to share one story with you today, which is centered around one person. And I think this story is very symbolic of what I've been doing throughout my life. And at the same time, it's one of the best examples, I think, you can imagine of what can be an example of solidarity among journalists, of building strong networks among journalists, and how this can then make countries like mine much more visible on the global map, which I think is extremely important. So how do I use it? Should I just... Oh, okay. So I'm going to tell you the story of this person. His name is LDR Arab, and he was one of the students at Kloop, the media that I had the privilege to be one of the co-founders. And since we co-founded Kloop, since I founded Kloop with a friend of mine in 2007, the idea was that we want to bring up a new generation of journalists in my country, in Kyrgyzstan. A country which, for such a long time, had been part of Russian Empire first and the Soviet Union, a country which totally lacked independent media up until 1991. So when we founded Kloop in 2007, the idea was that we want, first of all, to bring the whole idea of independent media to the country, to make independent media as strong and as popular as possible. But also we needed journalists. We needed people who will write stories, obviously. And we started working with students whose age ranged, actually, and some of them were young. And LDR was one of these young students. He came to Kloop and he was 17 years old. He had just graduated from high school. And he was brilliant from the very beginning. It was in 2010. It was a very turbulent period in Kyrgyzstan's history. We had just experienced our second revolution. And there was a lot to cover. And there was also lack of high-quality journalists. So basically, right as soon as he came, and it was also part of the model of our journalism school, he was immediately thrown into the whirlpool of Kyrgyz politics. So he was going to the parliament, he was taking interviews, he was covering events which were actually historic for our country, and he did it brilliantly. So brilliantly that within a year, we offered him a job. And he became our staff journalist. And then he grew and grew and grew, and then he became an editor, and then he became an editor-in-chief at some point. And under his leadership, Kloop then reached new heights. And for me, one of the most important moments in Kloop's history was when our investigations and when our work started spreading worldwide. And it's really great that I'm here today speaking with Paul Radu, because OCCRP was one of the key organizations that helped spread what we were covering to the global audience. And 2019 is one of the most important years in our history. It was the year when we started publishing a series of investigations about a smuggling empire that was operating in Kyrgyzstan. The smuggling empire originated in China. They corrupted the whole Kyrgyz government, basically. And the main person they were dealing with was a person who was the deputy head of Kyrgyz customs. They managed to build this transport networks. They managed to build this basically smuggling network. They were bringing goods from China. They were not paying any tariffs or taxes in Kyrgyzstan. And they were then reselling this stuff further to other countries that Kyrgyzstan borders, and even further to Russia. And we managed to find proof that they earned at least $700 million from these illegal operations in Kyrgyzstan. And why was OCCRP involved in that? And why was Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty also involved in this series of investigations? Because then it appeared that it does not affect only Kyrgyzstan. The story first looked a little bit local, you know, when we started finding out about it, like some corruption scheme in Kyrgyz customs, it's not really something we could be surprised with, to be honest, since Kyrgyzstan became independent. But suddenly then, when we started tracing the money, and that's where OCCRP's expertise was especially essential, we found out that the money that was illegally earned in Kyrgyzstan was then laundered all around the world. And that people who were involved in this scheme, people who organized this smuggling empire, they would then buy property in the US, they would buy property in the UK, they built the whole building in the city of Augsburg, Germany, which is quite random, but I mean, it shows basically how stories which first seem maybe local to you, they actually have a global influence. And maybe in the world where, as Case said, organized crime and corrupt officials are so well organized and interconnected across borders, they really perform very efficiently across borders. There is possibly no such thing as a local corruption story, because quite often you would see that it is somehow connected at least with neighboring countries, and in some cases with actually a wide range of countries, like in this case. So when this investigation started being published, it caused protests in Kyrgyzstan, and then it also caused some reaction worldwide. This series of investigations eventually led to this person from the Kyrgyz government being sanctioned by the US. It was the first time when somebody from Kyrgyzstan was sanctioned under Magnitsky Act. And for me, it was also amazing to see how this transformation happened, for example, with LDR, who came to us being a 17-year-old recent high school graduate, and within next 9 years, he turned into a person under whose leadership we could do such kind of things. And today, he works at OCCRP. He's one of the senior reporters, and I'm extremely proud of him, of course. And this is one of the investigations he worked on, I think it was this year, maybe last year. But anyway, his work, part of his work has been dedicated to investigating how Kyrgyzstan is being exploited by Russia today in its war on Ukraine. And unfortunately, my country has been exploited heavily. Unfortunately, my country has become one of the spaces that Russia has been using to avoid sanctions and to organize the transportation of different sort of stuff. This investigation that we see as an example, it shows cars, but it's not only cars, of course. And there is suspicion that a lot of what Russia is transporting through Kyrgyzstan is actually then used in its war operations against Ukraine. But again, why it's important to me that LDR is involved in this is because there is a journalist from Kyrgyzstan doing this work as part of the team, that works on this investigation. And I think it's extremely important that LDR is not the only one, of course, that we managed to grow up the whole pool of journalists from Kyrgyzstan who then grew up to be senior reporters at international media organizations like OCCRP, who then managed to combine their local expertise about Kyrgyzstan with their skills in journalism, with the networks of journalists they have access to, which then eventually makes, on one hand, my country much more visible on the global stage, but also helps global audience to understand why my country is important. Because that was a problem for me, to be honest, for quite a long time, is feeling that people really don't care about Kyrgyzstan. As Case said, a blank spot on the map somewhere, in Central Asia. And then when you actually see this whole chain, when you see all these links of how everything is interconnected, you see that maybe there is even direct influence on what's going on, between what's going on in Kyrgyzstan and between what possibly could happen even here in the Netherlands. Because if there is a country that helps Russia to avoid sanctions, that helps Russia keep, its war industry, for example. It helps Russia continuing its attacks against Ukraine. And especially with now Trump coming to power, who knows, who Russia will attack next, and maybe they will attack the European Union. And I hear more and more, the threats of this being as probably realistic as they have never been in the past. So that's why I think it's both important, extremely important for people in this part of the world to understand and to know more about what's happening in my country, and not only in my country, we are talking literally about the whole world. And at the same time, it is important that in my country, there are resources available to continue bringing up generations of journalists who can bring their knowledge and their expertise, something that nobody else can possibly have. So basically, this is the starting point from which I would want to begin the discussion that we are about to have today. Case asked me to be short, so I used only 3 slides. I will not show the 4th slide, but there is a 4th slide that I would like to mention later on, after we finish talking. Yeah, so this is a food for thought, what I said, and let's begin with this and let's discuss what we can do further. Should I go here?
Thank you, thank you. And the technique has asked me if you would take the yellow chair.
Me?
Yeah. But there's no immediate sanctions if you would have gone for the red one. And also, while we're in the business of applauding, please give a warm hand for Paul Radu, who I will also ask to come upstairs. And let's remind each other to show the 4th slide at some point.
Yes, but not now, but
not
a bit
now.
later.
Okay, I'll give the card in your hand that you at some point say, it's time for the 4th slide.
Okay.
It's in your hand. Bektour, maybe we should also tell a little bit more about your personal geography and how you ended up working now in Warsaw in Poland. First, I'll say a little bit something about Paul Radu, co-founder and the head of innovation at the OCCRP, standing for
the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project.
And this time with the microphone.
Oh, this time with the microphone. It's an acronym for the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, a very, very bad name for a global organization, but it's what we came up with, about 18 years ago, and it stuck with us.
2007. Yeah, and despite of the name, I'm afraid to say you're the autocrat's worst nightmare, because there have been major investigative projects, scopes that started very local and ended up being, just like what LDR said, there's no such thing as a local corruption story. Some famous stories, award-winning stories, are about the Russian, Azerbaijani and Troika laundromat investigations. I actually heard that you were the one to coin the word laundromatting.
Yeah, that was years ago when, in about 2010, we realized at OCCRP that we were investigating the same story over and over again, because it was always about the offshore company, about the bank, about the formation agents, so the same kind of blueprint. And I decided at that point in time that we would do all the investigations at once. So let's investigate the infrastructure, the system that allows for all this to happen. Because what you've seen in Kyrgyzstan is the same thing that happened, in Turkmenistan, that happened in my own country, in Romania, and so on and so on. In Venezuela, in Bolivia, all over the place is the same blueprint for corruption. And this would be high-level corruption and a lot of money. And the laundromats were the systems, the delivery systems for money laundering.
Yeah, so that's very high up in the public tree, working together with corrupt business leaders and criminals, basically.
Yeah, this would be the autocrats, this would be the organized crime, working hand in hand with what we call the criminal services industry. Lawyers, accountants, people who would form companies, and so on and so on. Usually unscrupulous business people who would be ready to serve, the thieves without giving it a second thought. For the money, obviously.
So you would wholeheartedly underscore that sentence. There's no such thing as a local corruption story.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, most, and especially when we're talking about high-level corruption, the corruption that really impacts a population. So not just the bribe, that's given to a cop, but the real corruption, that really affects systems in a country. That, has people affected daily, that has poverty levels increasing, that's always cross-border corruption. I've never seen a case of just purely local corruption that was at that level.
Yeah, and Bektour, did you realize this as well when you started with the story that you mentioned and you highlighted in your story? And how did you find the cooperation with the OCCRP? How did you build that cooperation?
Actually, the cooperation with the OCCRP started a bit earlier than that. I think 2 years before that. And mostly because Kloop had already started publishing some investigations, which, again, we also thought were local, and then we would every time find something, at least connection with Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. And then at some point we met, I think it was Drew Sullivan, who we met at one of the conferences, and LDR, I think, met him.
It was, I think, at the Riga summer school.
Yeah, probably. Actually, LDR was the first one who went there and who established this connection with the OCCRP.
And you met in Latvia then?
Yeah. So that's a good example of how we should be organized, I think. Unfortunately, I think journalism worldwide is not as well organized as crime.
How come?
We have less money. I think, no, really. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Because it's extremely expensive in general to organize, high-level, high-quality journalism in every country in the world. And in some countries, it's also extremely difficult to turn it into a classic media business kind of model. For example, in Kyrgyzstan right now, you can't really make a sustainable business model out of media outlet, because as soon as you publish something that the government thinks critical of it, they will call the advertiser and ask them to remove all the advertising.
And the media owner, and just say,
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, this is where Kyrgyzstan has come. We've had these glimmers of hope throughout our history. The last one was in 2020 when we had our third revolution and failed again. We are champions at failing our revolutions, and right now, okay, I'm a bit now going into a different topic. But yeah, basically that's how we built this friendship with the OCCRP, and then Kloop at some point became a member network.
Network, yeah.
And I don't remember how this story was initially found. I mean, there were rumors about the customs guy in Kyrgyzstan becoming extremely rich. And then I think it was Radio Liberty who were the first ones to film his house that he built in the city of Osh in Kyrgyzstan. It was a very posh, house.
In the middle of Osh, the old city in the south of Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, that one, the second biggest city in Kyrgyzstan. And from there we started digging up, and then we found something, Radio Liberty found something, OCCRP found something, and then we just combined our efforts.
Yeah. And how did you expect that? Because when you started Kloop, you were yourself quite young. You were working with a lot of young journalists and basically having a lot of fun, it seems, digging into local stories, and suddenly you became part of this big, all over the world corruption network. Was that always part of the plan, or?
I mean, we were dreaming of it when we established Kloop with my friend Rinat Tukhmatchin. I was 21 years old, he was 22, and we had this romantic passion for, uncovering the truth and covering what's going on in Kyrgyzstan. We were very much interested in politics. And also, but it is a very generational thing. Like, it was in 2006, just a year after Kyrgyzstan had first revolution, in which both Rinat and I somehow took part. Because I was helping covering this revolution for the first generation of Kyrgyz bloggers. We were doing the first ever text live stream, sort of without video, explaining what's going on. And Rinat, he joined the volunteer forces to protect one of the supermarkets in Kyrgyzstan from being looted. So that's how we kind of got involved, and we were very much into politics. And the period in history of history in Kyrgyzstan at that point was extremely everybody got involved in politics. So we founded Kloop, and we first started with covering local stories, of course, and it was mostly short news pieces, mostly written by students of our journalism school. But then we were thrown into the history sometimes against our will, really. Like, for example, when the second revolution happened, we found ourselves in the epicenter of it. And that was I think, the first test of us as journalists when the second revolution was going on.
Losing the youth a little bit.
Yes. Actually asking young people not to go to the central square of Bishkek because it was too dangerous. So Rinat and I went instead. And it was the bloody revolution that we had when 88 people died in the city center. And we at some point realized we are one of the very, very few media who continues covering it.
Yeah.
So this was, I think, the breaking point in the history of Kloop.
Yeah, that was the the coming of age story of Kloop, and a very painful one at that. And then thrown into history in your personal story, that meant that you were at some point in exile.
Yes, since 2021. And this is a more recent story. So unfortunately, what's going on in Kyrgyzstan today is very sad. And despite our country, having this reputation of island of democracy and whatever, we've been nicknamed since 1990s. Unfortunately, we've lost all of it during the last 5 years. And we lost it partially because we lost against the organized crime. We lost it also partially because we lost against Russia. And I can explain that if the audience is interested. So why current Kyrgyz authorities feel so, endlessly powerful is because they are receiving a lot of support from Russia. That's, I think, one of the key reasons why everything is going on this way. They feel absolutely untouchable. And Russia needs them for all the schemes that I have described before. And that basically brought authoritarian regime in Kyrgyzstan. For the first time in our history, it is as brutal as it is now. Currently, there are 2 journalists from Kloop who are in detention, who are being arrested. I don't even know what is the correct status for them right now, because they have not had access to lawyers since they were
no trial,
detained. Yeah. There was some trial which left them in this pre-trial detention until the end of July or something, but they still have not even met a lawyer. And there have already been mass arrests before, with journalists from other media too, like Temirov Live, for example, another prominent media outlet from Kyrgyzstan whose journalists were arrested last year. And that's something that was unthinkable for us even recently. But unfortunately, this is, the harsh reality of Kyrgyzstan today. And also, of course, some people were forced to leave the country after being threatened to be arrested. And this was my case in 2021. And I left for Ukraine.
That was a very clever move.
And that was not the best timing possible. But in a way, I think it also, then yes, of course, in 2022, I again had to make a decision of where I'm going to live. I didn't want to leave Ukraine even after the full-scale invasion started. But at the same time, we needed a safer country to build the infrastructure that would protect journalists from Central Asia in case of attacks against them. We were planning actually to build this infrastructure in Ukraine. Ukraine was the perfect country for this for quite a while.
And what do you mean when you say this infrastructure? That's physical places, safe houses, places to work.
Yeah, basically all of that. And the idea was that you have to be prepared to be working in exile. And I think this is what helped Kloop a lot after the attack from the government started. Because Kloop had been prepared. We started preparing to work in exile since 2017, actually. Preparing, all the necessary infrastructure for that, starting from having a legal entity abroad, ending with, being able to evacuate people somewhere. Why Ukraine was a great country for that before 2022? Because we don't need visas to Ukraine. And it was relatively easy to organize a swift, evacuation if needed. With the European Union, it's much more difficult because getting visas to EU for Kyrgyz citizens or for citizens of any other Central Asian country is pain in the ass. So we either have to use some intermediary country, but there are less of them now available, which would be safe enough. So yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, part of this infrastructure probably I cannot reveal publicly, but part of it was, yes, actually building everything necessary to help journalists and not get them into too much trouble.
Yeah, and I wonder, Paul, what your answer would be if I ask you what is needed in terms of physical infrastructure in order to be investigative journalism in the era of autocracy. Because I think autocrats, and they all show this amazing capacity to outlast the news cycle and to even credit themselves for the truth discrediting them. So they know how to play this game quite well. So how can journalists actually build power, maybe physical infrastructure, and not only be busy with publishing truths and publishing stories?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, obviously the first step is to truly understand the enemy. And when we say autocrats, we mostly refer to the people that, you know, show up in our investigations, you know, people who we kind of perceive as the masters of puppets and so on. But that's just the surface of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at this custom official that we investigated together, and I bet you in Kyrgyzstan there's other people like him that we've never investigated. And that's just the reality of things all over the world. We are too few investigative reporters to actually, you know, investigate what needs to be investigated. Just to put it in numbers, there's about 3.2, 3.3 trillion US dollars every year in criminal money going through the world's financial systems. Now, Kloop, OCCRP, at OCCRP we have right now 72 member centers, and we have many more partners. And we probably investigated in the past 20 years close to 1 trillion US dollars in 20 years. So I'm giving you these numbers so that you see that the work we're doing is amazing, I believe. It's just great, you know, but we never stood a chance to win against the autocrats, because the autocrats are this very thick layer that accumulated over the past 5 decades. Mm-hmm. Investigative reporting with our infrastructure, you know, these cross-border relationships were built slowly over the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. So they had a head start, and they have a lot of power that we haven't yet understood.
Even touched upon. Yeah.
Exactly, because the issue here is that crime pays, right? And these people, and lots of people look at crime, you know, from a law enforcement kind of perspective. You know, law enforcement, the police, intelligence agencies, they're investigating this case and this case and this case, and they're getting some people, you know, arrested, and some money may be recovered. But what law enforcement doesn't do is they don't investigate crime over time. And that is the crime that matters. This accumulation of crime, of wealth and power over the past 5 decades, this is what we're paying a price for now. Because it's not just journalists that don't see the whole kind of picture. It's law enforcement, it's the citizens, I mean, the people in general. Mm-hmm. We've only seen slices of this.
And Applebaum goes as far as saying this is global regime building. This is a system that's almost so well equipped in working together. This is getting to a global corruption
Absolutely.
regime.
I mean, look, we've identified people who started their criming, let's say, back in the 70s, the 80s. You find their names in the archives of the former socialist communist secret services in Eastern Europe, for instance. And those people were never touched by any investigation, be it a law enforcement investigation, journalistic investigation. They built up and built up and built up. It's what I call those people the criminal angel investors. Because what they do right now is they invest in upcoming criminals. They literally go out and identify promising criminals and invest in their business, because that's very lucrative. So this happens large scale, and we don't even see it. So this is where I believe building this type of infrastructure that allows, people like, LDR, for instance, to advance from a child, basically, right, to one of the best investigative reporters in the world, is critical.
And how do you do that?
How do you do that? Through a lot of work. I mean, the main thing is that the infrastructure should be based on, first of all, security. Security for all the investigative reporters,
Then you would need national governments that are not part of the global regime to assist?
Ideally, you do this without governments. Now, unfortunately, for a long time, there was no money at all for this type of cross-border investigative reporting. So you had the US government, you have the Dutch government, you had other governments helping, create this infrastructure. Like OCCRP, for instance, we created this place for all these member centers to use technology, to use secure comms, to be as safe as possible, to have legal means of defense. And this all takes a lot of time and a lot of money. But most importantly is to engage with very young people like Bektour did with Kloop, and to grow from there towards a place where you can make a difference. Now, when I'm talking about this type of infrastructure and what we've done this far, Kloop and my organization, I see this as the first wave towards the infrastructure that will matter more. And that infrastructure that will matter more is the infrastructure that we extend towards the citizens. Because the numbers, I'm always saying this, like, there aren't more than 10,000 investigative reporters in the world. There aren't more than that.
That's the total sum of investigative reporters.
The total, and I'm exaggerating. When you have these, biannual conferences, the Global Investigative Journalists Network, you have about 2,000, 2,200 people coming there. So, but let's exaggerate and say 10,000 people. That's like a very small town or a very big village, right?
Yeah.
And the issue, as you've seen from what Bektour presented, I mean, the issue with one custom official is huge. You have to dedicate months and sometimes years to investigating one single case. But how many cases are out there that you don't investigate? So this is where the infrastructure, the secure infrastructure to cooperate across borders, the tools to work with large amounts of data, the computing capacity that you need to process the data, to connect the dots of what happens in Kyrgyzstan to what happens in Colombia, for instance, because there's a lot of drug trafficking, perhaps, between the two.
And you were saying the key here is to, at some point, connect to citizens, to civil society. Because
the key is to grow from what has been built already, from this body of knowledge, from this type of interaction like Kloop and OCCRP, and to kind of use this as a blueprint for the citizens to be able to perform investigative tasks together with these networks, but also on their own, in their own interest.
Yeah, and at some point I've heard you say the need is now there for a sort of a global newsroom, a hub, a physical place where this security is guaranteed and where the training of journalists can happen. What would then happen? Would that be the missing piece?
I think, obviously that would help. And I was just in Berlin last week, and they have there the House of Journalism that was built there by Publix, and there are various organizations hosted there. And that's, I think, a great model where you bring investigative reporters together with various activists and others, to kind of build up capacity, investigative capacity. And that's I think, amazing. But we need to develop the virtual spaces. The virtual spaces that, as we heard quite a few times in these meetings here, are currently controlled by big tech, by other bad actors. So we need to create those virtual places in a way that ensures safety for this type of collaborations where you have to expose high-level organized crime and corruption.
Yeah.
So I think that's key to these virtual spaces, physical spaces if possible, sure, but virtual spaces to develop, to do training, to share tools, to share blueprints, because from an investigation like they did, you can expand and say, well, this same MO, this same way of doing things, can be met in this other country. Let's apply the same blueprint there, and let's investigate, the local customs officials who are corrupt, and so on and so on and so on.
And Bektour, if you look at the journalists out there right now, for example, I'm thinking of this room of journalists who were sitting next to Trump at the NATO top, and Trump was making all these jokes about them, about their job, about what they were doing, and totally breaking down all the principles. And they were sitting there laughing and having this passively come over across their faces. Do we have hope that at some point journalists will band together and organize this? And another example, obviously, is what happened in Gaza, is where it's the most fatal year for journalists on the ground working together with civilians, trying to bring up the truth. How is the journalist class ready for this new level of hybrid autocracy? Or do we all need to find thousands and thousands of LDRs and need to hide them quickly in a global hub? What makes you hopeful?
Definitely LDR story is probably the most hopeful here. I think in a way people like LDR can now be great trainers for American journalists, because they probably will have to, they know
that type of regime better now than
exactly,
the Americans,
because LDR has been dealing with the Trump-like kind of shit since he was 17, so he knows. he has matured,
the
dealing
jokes.
with. Like you mentioned, Trump treating journalists like we've had this all the time in Kyrgyzstan. I remember actually in 2017, after we published our investigation on some machinations at the elections, and then president of Kyrgyzstan was mocking our journalists at the press conference, and he actually said something like, "Every time I read Kloop, I have a feeling as if I stepped into a piece of shit." And he literally said that, like, at the press conference in front of all the journalists. And our poor journalists were sitting there, and everybody was staring at them. And it was so embarrassing and awkward. But I think what really should change in the global infrastructure of journalism cooperation is, first of all, the financial inequality. Because it's been so hard to fundraise for Kyrgyz journalism throughout all the years I've been doing it, to be honest. And thank God we are an independent republic at least, and I will later explain what I mean by this. Because there were at least some separate, for example, sources of funding that we could use that were aimed at Central Asia, but still, later on I would find out the budgets, for example, of media outlets in some richer parts of the world, and I was shocked by how much bigger they were. While in our case, we had to fight for, some 20,000 euro funding per year, let's say, which is, totally not enough to sustain a newsroom and pay journalists, what they deserve to be paid. So I think we should do something about that, and that's a huge question, of course, how we do that.
Because how we get the financial when all the global leaders are really trying hard to get these checks and balances out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as I mentioned before, turning ourselves into a proper business model, for example, for a media outlet from an authoritarian country is nearly impossible. Just because the authorities will do everything they can to destroy your business model as soon as possible. And that's what has been happening not only in Kyrgyzstan. That's been happening across at least the part of the world that I'm more familiar with. Like in Azerbaijan, for example, they had this wildly popular Maidan TV, which at some point had quarter of the population of the country, visiting them, and nobody wanted from Azerbaijan to advertise there because they were just afraid to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's why, what do you have to rely on? You can rely on possibly raising money from your readers, but then again, we are talking about countries where people are not rich enough to be able to, for example, donate to your media outlet. You have to rely on grants in this case, and you have to hire people like fundraisers who would do that work, or you have to combine somehow editorial work and fundraising. and then you have to fill out multiple forms, and then in the end you still not get enough.
And like coming back to the very first point that you made, that there is no such thing as a local corruption story.
Exactly.
If this point becomes very clear in even the heads of the governments that claim to be super worried about what's happening with the hybrid democracies and the Erdogans and the Putins of this world, then surely that would be a very good source of money for a newsroom such as the ones that you're describing.
Absolutely, and I mean that's why actually I brought up the story of LDR to show that the work that he's been doing, and the more experienced he would become, this work would highlight how actually what's going on in Kyrgyzstan is extremely important, not only for Kyrgyzstan,
but even for Downing Street and even for
even for the Balie maybe, because.
Well, the Balie is where the change is made.
Yeah.
You can see them all topple from here, that's always.
No, what I meant is that like, we are probably living in these wild times when there is a non-zero probability that the Balie might be hit by a Russian rocket at some point, That's what I mean. I mean, that's how scary it has become. Everything that we thought was unthinkable in terms of like the dictators turning into warmongers has become a reality.
Yeah, and I believe you because your track record from Bishkek to Kiev to Tbilisi to Warsaw is actually sort of showing this upwards line of danger. So
I hope I'm not bringing war to the countries where I move.
If you're mongering, I'm sort of taking your point. That's what I'm saying.
No, but I mean to be honest, really, like right now we are joking, but I remember like sitting in Kiev with my friends.
Yeah.
Like a week before the full-scale invasion or something. And we were sitting in the very center of Kiev in one of the fancy bars.
And working like full-time on the people behind it, basically.
Sorry?
And all the while working full-time on the people who were behind that regime. Sorry, make your point.
No, I was just trying to describe the
I was getting ahead of you, I'm sorry.
The environment. So we were sitting there, and it's a lively sort of weekend evening in Kiev. People are walking, everything and we were sitting and we were like, there had already been this report that Russia is preparing to invade, Ukraine. And we were like, it doesn't look like the city doesn't look like a city which would be invaded in a week. Like everything is so like festive in a way, It was February, it was St. Valentine's Day sort of around. You can imagine what the atmosphere was, and really a week has passed and there are rockets flying into the city. So. That's the thing. And why did they fly? And what were people around the world not aware of? And that's, I think, one of the key problems, that maybe people around the world did not follow enough how Russian regime appeared, first of all, in first place, how, on what did it build itself, how it has become, strong enough to actually organize such kind of an invasion. And maybe that's why there should be much more attention paid from the global audience, and especially from the audience which is privileged and rich enough to be able to donate into this kind of projects.
You're talking about this audience or the audience?
Maybe this audience. I don't know. I heard ticket to my speech costed like 35 euros. I would never pay.
Maybe the fourth slide is a fundraiser now. I think what the fourth
slide is a fundraiser, but we'll probably get to it a little bit even later. But yeah.
And I wanted to briefly pause us here and have us be elegantly interrupted by yet another man on stage. I'm sorry about that. Another program later today is Feminists Against the Tyrant. This is a mental unlike I've seen in a while. But I want to give the stage very briefly to Ruslan Yatiev, if I say your name correctly, a journalist from Turkmenistan, also Central Asia, and sometimes referred to as the North Korea of Asia.
Very often, unfortunately.
And give him a warm hand of applause.
Thank you very much. I'm proud to have known Bektour for 23 years. If I may reveal that small secret, may I?
Yeah, sure. Which secret?
You'll hear it now. Well, in 2002, we as teenagers, I from Turkmenistan and he from Kyrgyzstan, started to study journalism at the American University of Central Asia in Bishkek. And it ended slightly differently to both of us. Bektour did not or could not complete his studies, and then he said, okay, screw you all, and established one of the best media outlets in Kyrgyzstan that is like a model to follow for, well, definitely in Central Asia, I would say even in the CIS region. And yeah, so it's a long and very bright story of Bektour himself and Kloop KG. So good to see you again in the Netherlands. My name is Ruslan Miatiev. I'm the founder and editor of Turkman News. It's an independent media and human rights organization focused solely on Turkmenistan. We are also a member center of OCCRP since 2022. And this is, as was said already, one of the most closed and repressive countries in the world. Unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of even trying to work inside the country because it's impossible. We have had so many journalists, also from our own outlet, that have gone through prison. And any activism, any political ambitions, any attempt to, you know, get your head out of the water level is punishable in that country. And I can show you, I brought a few newspapers with me from Turkmenistan. For 15 years, until 2022, we were ruled by this gentleman, Mr. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, and the name of this newspaper is Adalat, which means justice. I have a feeling that, you know, they give names to, you know, to things, you know, which means quite the opposite, actually. It is justice, but there is no justice. Like in the Soviet times, we had Pravda, but there was no Pravda, the truth. We have also a newspaper called Galkanish, which is the revival, of course, the great revival of the nation, of the culture, of everything under the smart leadership of the president. So the country was ruled by this man for 15 years until one day he decided to give way to the young. And in 2022, this young man replaced him, his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedov. He's not fully in power. Even this newspaper shows who is really in control of the situation. It's his father still, unfortunately. We don't have the privilege to work in the country, and when the discussion went into corruption being local or not local, I think Turkmenistan is one of the few examples where corruption could be local, or at least that's what we have found out since 3 years ago. Our corrupt officials, and the country is completely corrupt, trust me. Our corrupt officials, they probably prefer to keep their assets, their dollars, their euros, British pounds, whatever they use, under their mattresses at home. Or, I mean, I would be happy to find a palace somewhere in the south of France belonging to the president or his secret mistress or whoever. But unfortunately, the most or the biggest that we can find is, you know, a bunch of apartments in Dubai, or you know, a home in Istanbul or in the area of Istanbul. It could mean that we simply did not dig, you know, where we could have, but it's the circumstance, unfortunately. It's one of the most closed countries that does not reveal its commercial database, any registry, you name it. Even the names of public officials sometimes are not available. We need to look into archives, newspaper archives, physically go through, you know, these papers and find out the names or dates or places. In 2022, we joined the OCCRP after a story that a colleague of mine and I published together on the Turkmen ambassador to the United States. We found that he had real estate in the States worth $6 million. And this was one of the most, in fact, the longest serving Turkmen diplomat overseas, based in Washington. When we published that, of course, with all the limited capacities and capabilities that we had, OCCRP then reached out to us and said, hey, there's could be potentially more behind that story. And this is how the interaction and cooperation started. And then we released up to date, to this day, 4 investigations. They are, of course, on a much smaller scale. For example, when, Turkmenistan is a super presidential republic where the head of state, his word is basically a law, yeah, and you cannot challenge it. So he orders to build a beauty clinic in the center of Turkmenistan, in the center of Turkmenistan's capital, and then through databases that were leaked to us, we would find that they suddenly and secretly changed the ownership of that beauty clinic, with the president's sister being one of the shareholders, and her nephews and her children, etc. So yes, it is corruption. Yes, it involves millions of dollars, but it's rather local. The biggest that we found was, and we're working on one story now, it is being reviewed by the editors and still to come, but previously the biggest we found was indeed president's nephews owning 18 properties in Dubai. One was a big villa on this famous Palm Jumeirah area, and the rest were simply apartments and even studios in some cases. I don't know where you want me to stop, but
I will never say that I want you to stop. But yeah, I think we can take the example of Turkmen News now and see why it's such a great example of how, even if you're not in the country, or even after exile, setting up a local network and training young people and having these digital connections still can actually become a very good model of unveiling these big corruption schemes.
Yeah.
And lead to hopefully much better news outlets than the ones that you held in your hands.
Yeah. As I said, we didn't have the privilege even to be in the country. All of the people that we work with, they work undercover. They don't reveal their names. We never reveal our sources. And as I said, we had several journalists that have gone through prison, unfortunately. But the good thing is that, once you produce a decent piece, and if you get it right into the Turkmen audience, for example, I'm talking about my own example, then you kind of build this trust, and people, even in the government, they start to ask questions. Well, maybe it's indeed not the era of revival, or maybe, this Adalat doesn't exist. And the good thing is that this level of trust leads to them sharing things with us. And I call it a snowball effect. Yeah. When you produce something, and then if you get it properly disseminated, then you get more and more and more. I will probably boast here a bit and say that we have a lot of access to a lot of different things that far not everybody, even in Turkmenistan, has. Databases, phone numbers. We have only one mobile operator in the country, which is also under the family's control, the president's family. And we have access to that database where we can look up names, see their phone numbers, see their passport numbers, see their addresses. Just a few days ago, somebody shared a database of traffic police of Turkmenistan with me. And unfortunately, it's only the capital, includes cars that are registered in the capital, but still it has like over 200,000 entries in it, which is a massive tool for us to look through, and perhaps something comes out of it.
Thank you, Ruslan, so much for this brief intermission. And I think we've reached a point where I think this trust that you build, even so that people in the regime, in the government, will help you to become a source is a very vital one. Please give Ruslan one hand of applause. Paul, would you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, what Ruslan mentioned here is really the most important thing to exposing more corruption and crime, trust. And this is where, for instance, at OCCRP, we're working together with Stina Ehrensvard. Stina, she's an amazing entrepreneur from Sweden. She created the YubiKeys. Perhaps some of you are familiar with these security devices that you can plug into your laptop, to secure your online accounts. It's one of the highest forms of security.
I'm afraid few people are, maybe. Or
so these are physical keys that you plug into your computer, and it secures, your online presence. Anyway, based on this type of technology, what we'll start deploying in September, October, is a digital press pass, which is based on the concept of verified anonymity. The idea is that trust, usually you can only create trust locally, because you got to know the people, you got to interact in some ways with the people. But through this verified but anonymous technology, you can expand trust across regions, across borders. So this is where you can engage, for instance, with someone from the government who would not want to be identified while cooperating with you, because now, through this technology, the person will be able to share as much as they want while being part of a network and being able to share information or to perform investigative tasks. So this is, I think, key to developing the networking, to going towards that next wave of investigative reporting. And building trust is really, at the core of it.
Even on a solely digital level? Even within the regimes? On
a solely digital level, especially because that's the most secure level if you do it right. For instance, imagine a system where, that's what we're deploying now, you have this physical key, right? And the backup of that physical key is elsewhere, in a different country. And maybe 2 or 3 copies of the same key are elsewhere. Now, when you're in your country and you break that key, nobody can access anything that you own in the cloud, in the secure cloud, in an encrypted way. So this, ensures that, and you can perform all sorts of tricks. You can have on the same key, you can have content that's not necessarily, exposing you to any harm, to any risk. There are various ways in which you can build your online presence. But yes, this is the way to work, especially because, as we've heard from Ruslan, from Bektour, you can't really work from inside the country.
Exactly.
You have to coordinate at least things from the outside.
Bektour, I want to ask you one final question, and then I want to move to the audience for 2, maybe 3 questions. And this is about that even if we know how to reveal the truth, even if we know how to build trust, even if we know how to gain a digital level of huge exposure and tell these stories, how do we ensure that the truth actually matters and leads to movement? And I ask you this because you have experience with seeing your story becoming a youth movement, seeing protests and actually challenging and bringing the downfall of a corrupt government official. How do we prevent sort of a narrative fatigue? Because I think the autocrats, even another scandal, another expose doesn't hurt them. And so how do you speak directly to the people who you hope will rise up?
I think, to be absolutely honest with you, I don't think that journalists' goal is to hope that people will rise up. We probably should not mix journalism and activism here too much. And I know that OCCRP is definitely against this sort of mindset.
Not in the business of toppling governments, but...
Yeah, that's something that
But we do work with activists a lot.
Activists, of course, can be our partners in gathering information. Activists are sometimes crucial in finding out the truth. But I would really be careful with this, because that's something that we've been blamed of. Actually, there's 2 journalists from Kloop who are now in detention in Kyrgyzstan, the charge against them is inciting mass riots. That's, unfortunately, that's something that our government loves exploiting, that we journalists are the ones who are
ideological
toppling
activists,
governments or whatever. That's not really the goal of journalism. And I think this is extremely important also in terms of building the trust with our audience, and that's what we've been trying to do all the years at Kloop, and the new project that I'm currently involved in that I hope I will be able to show a fundraiser for in a minute. Or maybe I should start actually doing that.
Yeah,
because
you have all the power in the world, actually.
I just lost the clicker. Oh my God. Thank you. That's the power. Yeah, I will already keep it. I will explain. There is a spoiler there, though. So, yeah. So basically, I think journalists should keep on being aimed at just telling what's going on. Just telling the stories. Telling the stories in such a way that it's, of course, going to be interesting for people to read or to watch or to whatever. I mean, it's as simple as that, and of course not lying. It's as simple as that. And now with the fundraiser, it has actually a connection to this. So I'm currently involved in a new project which I'm extremely excited about being involved. It's the first ever bilingual, indigenous-led, independent media outlet that covers Russia's republics. And let me explain what I mean by Russia's republics, because again, I'm afraid a lot of people are not really familiar with that. So what actually is common, for example, in the history of countries of Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan, and also Ukraine, and even Latvia or Estonia, is that we were all part of the Soviet Union. We were all colonized by Russian Empire at some point, and we all gained independence mostly in 1991. But not all of the republics and not all of the countries colonized by Russia gained independence in 1991, although there were attempts. And today, 21 republics still remain part of Russia. And some of them, like Chechnya, for example, tried to become independent, but Russia waged war against Chechnya, and which eventually Chechnya lost. So, yeah, and these republics, I mean, I was telling how hard it is to fundraise for a project in Kyrgyzstan. When I started helping to fundraise for this project, I was like, wow, this is even 10 times more difficult.
Because they're within the territory of Russia still, the republic.
Yes, and I mean, there are many obstacles here. First of all, we are talking about that funds which are aimed at supporting, for example, civil initiatives in Russia end up being mostly given to organizations which are led by ethnic Russians, but not indigenous-led. For example, also just global misunderstanding of how Russia is composed and of modern Russian colonies. And when I started working with journalists who are indigenous and who are from these republics that are part of Russia, I was amazed by, first of all, how similar the situation in these republics is to what Kyrgyzstan was through during the Soviet Union. Also, the same story of people, for example, sent to the war disproportionately from these republics, and as well as people from Kyrgyzstan were sent to fight in Afghanistan from 1979. Or, I don't know, all of us from Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, you name it, being sent to Czechoslovakia in 1968. So basically it's very similar. Also, almost lack of global coverage of what's going on. While two of the largest protests that happened on the territory of Russia during the last 2 years happened in these republics.
Altai?
One is Altai. Yeah. Oh, you are familiar with that. That's amazing.
No, thanks to your thanks to your initiative, actually. So
and the other one in Bashkortostan. Bashkortostan actually has an amazing grassroots movement, environmental movement. And the largest political trial right now in Russia is happening in Bashkortostan, where 80 people are still imprisoned. So anyway, it's incredibly difficult to find money for projects like this, because because just, of how discriminated I think indigenous people are globally, also because of this huge misunderstanding of
how the colonial Russian Empire operated.
How the Russian, colonialism operated and operates still up to this day. While I think it is extremely crucial, it is so important to actually support indigenous-led, like homegrown journalism in these republics as well. It is so challenging. It is so much more challenging, to be honest, than anything I did ever in Kyrgyzstan. I now understand how privileged I was in Kyrgyzstan, while especially Kyrgyzstan had a much higher degree of freedom of speech, for example. We could organize trainings in Kyrgyzstan itself. We could work with journalists there. We could, cover quite a lot, actually. We could publish something that would that authorities would be extremely frustrated about, and we could still be able to live in our own country.
Yeah.
Now, organizing, and organizing independent journalism in republics that are part of Russia is, of course, much more challenging. So that's why.
And just as vital.
And it is extremely vital. Again, because, this is all part of this Russian colonial, post-colonial sphere. And today it affects the whole world, including, of course, European Union. So that's why I just call everybody to scan this QR code. I don't know if it's seen in the broadcast.
I don't know what happens when you scan it, but I really hope that if I scan it, we will have an entire evening to talk about how these environmental stories of the Russian republics lead to these big stories, and how hopefully you're able to tell them and connect with local people there. I think that's a very, very fascinating way of opening the atlas once more to a decolonial way of looking at the map. Because right now, I'm afraid those are not even lines on the map, and that's something to really worry about. I'm gonna.
The QR code leads to buy me a coffee. Just.
But you will find out when you scan it. I want to go into the audience and catch some questions before we run out of time.
Thank you for this very interesting talk. Paul, you mentioned, I think, twice the concept of investigative tasks. And you mentioned it in something that I interpreted a little bit like crowdsourcing from the public, or do I just think too much ahead? But what do you mean by it, and how will you, what sort of movement would behind investigative tasks that the public could do?
Just briefly, what I mean is, for instance, in October of last year, I was in Madrid, in Spain, on my way to Paraguay, to Asunción. And there was like about 10,000 or more people who took to the streets in Madrid protesting the housing crisis in that city. What they said was, we don't have, places to rent, we don't have places to buy, the prices are prohibitive. But they were also carrying signs saying that more than 2 million apartments are empty in Madrid. And I was like, if these people just knew what's going on here, because they were blaming the Ministry of Haciendas, which is the housing ministry and all of that. In reality, what's going on, of course, people in politics are always to blame, sure. But what was really going on was that a lot of money, criminal money, was invested in housing in Madrid, in buying apartments, buying, all sorts of other places, lands and all of that. And that was criminal money that bought a lot. And people had no idea about that, and those places were kept empty. I went to Asunción, I saw people, living on the Paraguay River there in huts, because while in the center of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, you have these high-rises that are empty. And you're like, what's going on here? What's the parallel between Madrid and Asunción? And you go all over the world and you find the same situation. So what I mean by this cooperation with the public is, we know exactly how to investigate these matters. We are too few to investigate these all over the world, but what we can do is we can investigate 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 properties in Madrid and give people like the recipe. This is how you investigate on your street, on your neighborhood, in your place, and all of that. And so that people can perform these small tasks. I'm not talking about complex tasks. It's about 3 clicks. to do this investigation. So this is what I have in mind. And the housing crisis is just, I'm using this example as an example, but you can extrapolate from many of the investigative reporting that's done by Kloop, by others, you know, and go from there towards the public with very simple tasks. You won't be able to yet, you know, give like because what's important is to de-risk this investigative reporting. You don't want to put people in harm's way, especially citizens who don't have this kind of experiences, you know, that we have as investigative reporters.
So that was to clarify the investigative task. Were there some other questions right here?
What about your audience? Do you feel, because you are facing a lot of challenges, even threats of losing your lives in your work, but is your audience growing as your projects are growing? Because in my country, which is Slovakia, one of the biggest challenges we have is the lack of interest of general public. So the truth is available, but nobody cares. You bring amazing projects, but do you feel the audience is going up in alliance with your projects? Thank you.
I can answer that. So I think there is probably a connection between people, like the more desperate is life conditions of people, the more they are interested in reading about corrupt officials, I guess. Maybe this is the reason. But in Kyrgyzstan, like last year, for example, there was one Kloop investigation, which I was especially amazed about. And it was about president and his business partners, let's call them this way, taking control over some of the largest markets in Kyrgyzstan. And then I saw how the Kloop's team packaged it for Instagram, and I saw it gathering 4,500 likes or something, mostly from people in Kyrgyzstan, which shows it's a huge engagement rate, and it basically shows, how people are actually interested and that the audience is growing. And I guess probably one of the reasons is, yes, because people feel, the consequences of this corruption and of this crime on their daily lives. And then when I came to Poland, I remember I was talking to some colleagues in Poland, and that's what they were telling me, that it's of course great that we joined the European Union and that the level of life has become, the standards of life has become higher, but also it created a much larger chunk of population who are absolutely indifferent to even corruption in Poland, just because, the basic needs are guaranteed, more or less, and you sort of become a little bit, less indifferent to what's going on around you. And the same with Russia's Republics project, recently it hit the new engagement rate record on Instagram as well, by covering actually the protests in the Republic of Altai, where it received more likes than even it has followers at the moment. And it received 70,000 views, for example, one of the posts, which is a third of the population of this small republic, which basically shows that engagement rate is high, and people were leaving a lot of comments saying that finally somebody is covering this. So I think people, especially who are living in either, conditions of poor standards of living, or in a situation where their republics are turned into news deserts, they are quite thirsty for this kind of content, to be honest.
If I may just add to this, actually the story about the custom official is part of what we call now floodlight gaming, which what this means is that we need to build up audiences. We need to build up in a big way. We need to scale up. So at OCCRP, together with Kloop, with many other organizations, and with Veronica here, we are developing, for instance, this project called Floodlight Gaming to turn investigative reporting into video games. So this is one way to maybe instill those blueprints, those small investigative tasks inside games. And this is built on the back of something that we created 3 years ago.
Like Pokemon Go for investigative journalism, sort of.
I'm sorry?
Pokemon Go for investigative journalism.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the person who manages this project used to work for Niantic, and she developed Pokemon Go, which is a direct connection to Pokemon Go. So
I didn't.
I mean, you're good.
Yeah, well.
So and then, but this was built on the back of something that we started 3 years ago called the Floodlight, where we turn investigative reporting into fiction film. And this is working with high-level producers from Hollywood, from other places, from Europe, from all of that. People like the people who developed, The Wolf of Wall Street, or She Said, or The Americans, or Ozark. And the spirit is to turn all these amazing stories, into something that gets to more people, into something that inspires more people. So you're right about the audiences. I mean, there is this starvation for this type of content, but we need to be a bit more proactive, and to kind of use this content.
And I also know a local debate center not too far off the Leidseplein area who turns investigative journalism into theater plays with local actors. So that's could be an addition. Is there any final question maybe from the audience? Over here. I'll bring you the microphone.
Okay, my voice is loud. Bektour, you were going to tell us a little bit on how Russia really contributed to authoritarian rule in Kyrgyzstan. Can you still tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So it's going to be quite a long story. I will try to keep it a little bit short and simple. But basically, Russia has always been pursuing, to have some sort of control over whoever was in power in Central Asia, even after we became independent. And when you look, basically at the core of it, it's quite simple, is that our countries can bring something to Russia that it needs from the financial point of view, and also right now from the point of view of waging war. So what they did was they basically were involved in organizing all these schemes that currently help Russia receive whatever they need for their war infrastructure to sustain, and to and Kyrgyzstan is being exploited here. And some of the OCCRP investigations revealed some of these schemes. Radio Liberty had investigations that revealed some of the schemes. And some of the supplies, they involved electronics that are possibly used in rockets and drones produced in Russia. And the level of investment into our government seems to be enormous, especially into law enforcement agency, especially including into the what is it called, State National Security Service of Kyrgyzstan, which is the former KGB, where almost every employee is being actually educated in Russia by FSB. So it's I mean that's sort of the degree of this huge influence that Russia currently has over Kyrgyzstan. And it then is reflected in the way the government in Kyrgyzstan approaches the civil society. And even the legislation that has been introduced in Kyrgyzstan was basically copied from the Russian legislation. So we have a legislation which is similar to Russian foreign agent law now in Kyrgyzstan. The new media law that has been signed, that was signed, I think, only 3 days ago, is also based on the Russian experience. And in general, even this approach of arresting journalists, for example, arresting human rights activists, and arresting people for posts on social media, that also is part of this dictator's learning curve.
The dictator's learning curve.
That's not I didn't invent this term.
Yeah, but I feel like this curve might have hit the steepest point, and it's now on a decline. At least I hope so. It reminds me of something Alicia Gashinska wrote in a column last week in a Belgian newspaper. She will be speaking tonight, actually, on literature. That she said, even if Russia, for example, isn't interested in the classical land grabbing or the classical rocket sending that it loves to do in Georgia and in Kiev with Europe, it will still be a war about spheres of influence. And I think the Kyrgyz story is a big warning tale about how easy and how swift that can happen if the regime sees some cash in there. And I feel that, yeah, even in the Netherlands, this is a very, very good cautionary tale. I loved all your stories. I really enjoyed listening to you all. And I think, yeah, you guys are really working on the fertile topsoil of many-dimensional stories, not the stories that these autocrats want us to share. And I hope in the end we can all manage to find an end to the indifference, because that's part of the sphere of influence. Thank you so much, people, for coming, and feel free to chat. Feel free to scan any QR code you'd like. You're free to do so during the festival. Please visit the interview marathon. Bektour will be speaking there. Paul Radu will be speaking there. Naida Aronzeb, who is sitting over there, will also be speaking there. I think it's going to be a worthwhile conversation. There's many art pieces to see around the square, in the building. So please linger and have a chat, and maybe something to drink as well. Have a good day. Thank you so much.